Hi, I'm Beck and welcome to my March wrap-up. These are all of the things I read and I put down during the month of March. I'm currently reading a selection of books, but first I'd like to get into the books that I finished. So without further ado, the first book that I ended up finishing during March isn't quite a book, it's more of a graphic novel, but I digress. It is the first volume of Fence, and I think I found a new series that I am going to be obsessed with because it took me a very long time to distract myself from the fact that I don't own the other volumes in here. So I'm going to need to acquire those ASAP because I absolutely adored this and gave it 4 stars. It is essentially about Nicholas, who is training to become this fencing champion, and he goes up against Seiji, I think his name is, who was a former champion, and Seiji basically goes toe-to-toe with him and Nicholas doesn't walk away a victor. And then after this kind of battle of sorts, Nicholas sees him as very much a rival to overcome, and they end up going to the same fencing college and trying out for the same team. So it really chronicles their rivalry, and I can already see some great nuggets of character development and some realizations that might click in and have a light bulb moment a bit in the future. Also, it's very queer and I love a queer story. So I'm quite excited to see how the characters progress in here, and it's also not a massively long graphic novel series, and I also really enjoyed the art style. It was quite clear, clean and colourful, and I didn't mean to make that alliterative, but here we are. Honestly, I'm just really jazzed that I enjoyed this because I was really worried that I wouldn't. It's got a lot of hype around it, and I don't love C.S. Pacat's other work. I think the first book is called The Captive Prince, but it's not really my thing, and I don't love dark romance. So I read the first book and I didn't like it that much. Probably it's a 2 stars on reflection. I think I gave it a 3, but this was way more up my alley, and I feel like there's going to be a rivals to lovers situation in here, but very much a slow burn and maybe with a lot of yearning. There was some great kind of like anime exaggerated humor moments in here as well, just with the expression and the art style that I quite enjoyed too. So it's got a great tone, it's got great character development, and even though it's obviously set in our world, it's got great world building too, because I feel like I'm in that environment when I'm reading about it. So I really enjoyed this and I can't wait to continue. So I started the month off very short and very sweet, but very strong. Then at the beginning of the month, I got quite sick. I got an upper respiratory infection and I was like, I need to stay home and recover. So while I was recovering, I ended up finishing this in a day and a half. This is Witch Please. And I had this on my month's TBR for March, so I'm satisfied that I actually picked it up and finished it because reading physical books has not been a strong point lately just because I've been so busy. This book follows Danica and she's on the back of a bad breakup. She's also got a love interest in Titus, who runs and owns the small bakery in this town. And so because she's a witch and she's got this breakup history, she's going through a bit of a rough patch at the moment. She also can't discuss the fact that she's a witch with anyone who isn't also a witch, which is, pun not intended, which is something that I don't like about a story. It, for some reason, is just a line that I don't like because it feels like a subtle way to cross over into non-consent. Even though it was described in here in a realistic and believable way, and there was like a workaround of sorts, that would be enough for most people. Honestly, I think I'm in the very small percentage where I'm still like, I don't like that. I'm sorry if you can hear like the pterodactyls outside. It's the cockatoos. They were fine 10 minutes ago, but as soon as I hit record, now they're going crazy. I don't know why. But anyway, back to talking about the book. I absolutely ate this up. It was super readable and just easily digestible. The characters were easy to like. There were super steamy scenes, which were very descriptive. So all ticks so far. But even though I ate up the characters in here, I don't think I'm going to continue with this series. I was initially going to when I was about halfway through, but that whole kind of, I can't tell you that I'm a witch because there's a council that's put a curse on the fact that I can't discuss those types of things, like that kind of set me back. And so I know it's supposed to just be like a fun, steamy romance, but I'm not feeling it. So I'm not going to continue. I was also just kind of hoping that it would have a queer story centered in the sequel because the character Titus is bisexual and his sister is either gay or pan or bi, I'm not sure. I can't remember if it was specified or not, but in this story she's dating a woman. So it's actually just nice to see queer representation as part of a story that, while it's not centralized, it's just very like normalized, which is just really nice. And I was hoping that would be continued in a more central way in the sequels, but I've looked up the synopses of the second book and that's not the case. I'm like, I liked these characters, I liked the journey I took with them, but I don't think that it's going to be a series that I end up continuing. I was settled on 4 stars after I initially finished it, but then I lowered it to 3.5 just because of that whole like blurred line consent thing. I am sure that so many people are like, Beck, what are you talking about when it comes to that magic storyline? Because Titus is a human and so humans can't know about magic. I don't know, it just rubbed me the wrong way. I can't explain it any more than I already have. I wish I liked it more, but that thing just like undid the stitching for me and now I'm like, oh. So it was good. I liked the writing style. I ate up the characters, but I was in it and then I was finished with it. And then my reading took a bit of a dive, unfortunately, because after that kind of meh feeling, after I left Witch Please, I ended up starting You Should See Me in a Crown. And this had rivals to lovers potential because it's about the main character wanting to become prom queen, even though she's not really keen on being the center of people's attention. She just kind of wants to do well at school and then go to the college that she is aiming for. But to do that, she needs a scholarship, and if you're prom queen, you get gifted a scholarship. So I think she's kind of changing her trajectory around, and I liked how it was set up with the characters and the supporting characters, but I'm also just not super invested in it. And young adult really hits that way for me sometimes. I'll either just absolutely get sucked in and not want to put the book down, or it'll go the other way and I'll read a little bit of it and go, it's not for me. I honestly think I'm a little bit too old for this book, which, you know, hence the category young adult, and I'm turning 30, so it kind of checks out. So unfortunately I put this down at about 36 pages. I did try, let it be known. The next book I picked up was a library book, and I think I talked about it in my library TBR video, but The Wall came available on audio. And because I was recovering from a respiratory infection, I had to force myself to rest, which is surprisingly hard to do. After a few days, you start going stir crazy, but I was like, I'm going to get back into Animal Crossing. So I sat down for a couple of days and I played Animal Crossing, forced myself to rest, and listened to this on audiobook, and I gave it a solid 4 stars. It is what you could call a cozy apocalypse story, if there is such a thing, because it's about a woman in a hunting lodge and she's with a dog, a cat, a cow. I think that's all. Yeah, that's all of them. A dog, a cat, a cow, and a woman. And it's tracking her survival because she's counting all the matches she's got left and blocking out like, okay, I've got 5 years worth of fire, like I can cook this amount of stuff. And it's kind of a apocalypse story combined with Under the Dome, because this woman can't go beyond her lodging very far because she runs into a wall, like a literal invisible wall, and she can see on the other side that people have passed away and she doesn't know why. And it's a story from her understanding too. So if she doesn't have any understanding of electronical engineering or how to like mine the earth for produce, like she doesn't have a way to access that information. So she was talking about at one point a toothache and everything, and that just made me so grateful for all the resources that we have access to in everyday life that we just take for granted. Because if I had a tooth problem in the apocalypse, I'd be dead. So it made me understand and respect everything around me. And it was also just really nice and beautiful to see a character connecting with animals. She would respect that they were animals, but also have a connection with them as well that was quite an intimately emotional connection and very caring of them. And she got sad when, you know, cats would do the cat thing and just walk away and disappear rather than stay inside with her where she knew it was safe and that there wouldn't be, you know, nature for them to injure themselves on because she's not a vet, so she can't help them. So it was all just kind of fascinating to read about, and I really liked it. And even though it was very isolated in terms of the setting, it still had a decent driving force to it. There was purpose in the time that it spent with our main character, and there was development. So I really liked it. I gave it 4 stars, and I first heard about it on Emily Fox's channel, and both of us tend to have a science fiction interest. So when I saw that she was reading this and it was about like an apocalypse scenario, I was like, oh, that is a subsection of science fiction that I love. So I immediately borrowed it from my library and no one else had it on hold. So I was like, oh, I'll get this one. And then a whole bunch of other library books came in at the same time, and that made me panic a little bit. But I finished this one at least. Then I really surprised myself with what I finished next, because I have been kind of playing hooky with this book and I've been meaning to read it and then not touching it, but I finally finished it, and that is Bloodmarked by Tracy Deonn, which is the sequel to Legendborn. And this is a story that centers Arthurian legend, where initially with the Knights of the Round Table, their spirits have been reincarnated in people now, and so the whole goal is to keep the lines of that reincarnation as clear as possible. And so because there is that magical link, because there is power associated with these different familiar bloodlines, you're getting interesting discussions about race and about grief and violence in American history, which are all very interesting and multifaceted descriptions that are worth having as a discussion in a young adult book with these young characters that are trying to change things but are running up against so many different barriers. And so when I was reading this, I was just getting so frustrated, but that is by design of the story, and I was really rooting for the characters in here as well. I can't discuss too much about obviously where they are because it's a sequel, but the things I can say I will keep as spoiler-free as possible. And one of the things that frustrated me about this story is that one character kind of got sidelined in favor of some others, and it frustrated me that as a plot device, that character was removed for a while and then brought back in, because if you're setting up a whole story in book one with characters that I'm already invested in, and then you're kind of sidelining them for the sequel so that other things can happen while they're over here, it's very frustrating. Like, why not combine all of them? For a certain amount of the story, it made sense, but not for the entire thing. And so I was just really annoyed reading that, because I was like, I'm invested in this person. Why aren't they here? So a little bit of that frustrated me through the story, but I liked what was built up and I liked how complicated it was. Usually when there is stories with young adult characters, like younger teenagers, there's a lot of angst, and there was angst in here, but I think all of it was pretty well founded. And I'm admiring Tracy Deonn's capacity to pull that off, because it was very detailed in the way that she did it. It wasn't just because someone had decided to be frustrated. It was more based in reason than emotion, although both of them were definitely colliding. That is my vague way of describing it to you. It's also worth noting that the detail in the magic and the lore was fantastic. And it's a sequel with a lot of volume, so it makes sense that the world building could really be fleshed out, but I really like the different systems in here, and I really respected and understood where they were specifically each coming from and how our main characters kind of tapped into each one. And I think it's going to even further develop in the sequel, or I think the third book, the last book in the trilogy. I have predictions and I'm liking what was mentioned as like one-liners in here that I think is going to be developed later. Like, hey, throw back to that one moment, tap, tap on the shoulder, remember me? So I think it's going to really go in a direction that is quite expansive again, when it was initially quite expansive in this book too. There was also some great queer inclusiveness in this story that was also mentioned in the first book but is expanded on again here, and I'm hoping that again in the third book that it's even more brought to the forefront of the story. I'm looking forward to it basically. So I did give this 4 stars. I did go back and forth, but I realized that's because I was frustrated because the main character was frustrated, and that is a clever way to design your story, because you feel like you're frustrated with her but then you've got your triumphing moments with her as well. So I found that quite clever, but because of the frustrations I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to give it an entire 5 stars. Like the first book for me, 5 stars. This book, 4. But hopefully the sequel to this one, when eventually it comes out, is going to be a 4.5 to 5. So I'm hoping that it goes up from here. But yes, I liked this and I'm finally glad that I got to it, because that was one of the things that was concerning me about this year. I was like, this is a long book and I only have time for audiobooks, and this audiobook sample that I listened to was not great, so I needed to read it physically. So I guess that was like the one benefit of me getting sick. When I had to force myself to rest, I was like, guess I'll read a book now. Then I read another audiobook, but I also promptly DNF'd this book at 11%, which is did not finish. I put it down because I was just not engaged with it, and it is Zone 1, which is another dystopian kind of zombie apocalypse story. Basically, I finished The Last of Us and I was like, I need more content about the zombie apocalypse because it's one of my favorite subgenres of science fiction anyway, but I was like, I have an extra need now that I don't have The Last of Us to supplement my weekly consumption of content. So I went and borrowed a whole bunch of library books that were around this kind of genre, and Zone 1 was one of these, and it was chronicling the story of this one soldier. And initially I think he was going to study law, but then the apocalypse hit, and so he had all these pressures from his family. He's also dealing with the initial PTSD of seeing all the zombies and then reflecting and going, hang on, that's not somebody I know, because he keeps seeing people's faces that are familiar to him on these complete strangers who are zombies that are rabid and trying to kill him. So it had potential to become really introspective, but I didn't feel a connection to this character at all, and I think it was to do with the tone. It felt very descriptor level rather than character voice, and I don't know how to describe that in a more clear way so that you understand, but it just felt removed from me, and I didn't care about the main character. Like, he was going back into flashbacks and then present day and just describing what he was doing and how things were affecting him, but I was not invested emotionally, and I'm not entirely sure why. At times also the action was a little bit hard to follow. One thing I did like was that this character was actually smart, because so many zombie stories that I see, they don't wear any form of body armor at all, and then they're like, oh no, I've been bitten. This guy actually had body armor wrapped around him, so when things came to bite him, he didn't get turned into a zombie. It was kind of like World War Z, the film, in that way, where the characters wrap things around their arms so that if something latches onto them, they can like protect their face and also not get bitten. Like, obviously that's what you do so you don't turn into a zombie. Anyway, that was the like one smidgen of thing that I liked in here, the bit of detail that I enjoyed. Everything else I could kind of take it or leave it, and I ended up leaving it. Then I finally read another Tessa Bailey, and that is her newest release, Secretly Yours, and this follows Hallie, who is a garden designer or a gardener, and she's very chaotic, and we also follow her love interest, Julian. So when they were at school, Julian was a few years older than her, and they had this moment where they almost kissed, and then he left school, and Hallie got taken on the road by her mum, because her mum is also quite chaotic and would uproot Hallie constantly. And so because they didn't really get a resolution to that moment, and Hallie had a crush on him for a very long time, now that he's moved back into this small town just to write this book and kind of separate himself from his history teaching academic lifestyle, he's like, I need a bit of a circuit breaker. So he comes back to his old hometown to write a book. And now she's like, oh, we can finally have our moment. So it's about them kind of rekindling their relationship, even though Julian doesn't initially remember Hallie. And it's about Hallie writing secret admirer letters to Julian. And I liked the storytelling in the sense that it was just really easy to snap up. Like, when I wasn't listening to this audiobook, I was actively thinking about it. Like, I want to know what happens next. But when I got to the end of the book, I didn't love the entirety of the conflict. I think sometimes in Tessa Bailey books, the conflict can really be drawn out to a point where it doesn't need to be. Like, if the characters had a conversation, it would reduce that by like 2/3. So that is like the sticking point for me that is quite frustrating. I wish that was brought or scaled back a little bit, because that would really just make the characters connect in a better way. I find when trauma, or not necessarily trauma, but like frustrations and fears are discussed in character dialogue, it gives them a time to kind of be vulnerable with each other, and that vulnerability informs all this additional character growth. And so we missed that a little bit at the end of this book, not until like far later, which was very frustrating to me personally. But I did end up finishing it though. I gave it 3.5 stars. It's probably not my favorite Tessa Bailey, but the way that it's set up the side characters in here, Tessa Bailey does a really good job at doing that, and I'm looking forward to reading the continuation. I think she does companions of like the friends that were set up in the first book. Like, that's what she did with her Bellinger Sisters series. She wrote the older sister Piper in the first book, and then she wrote the younger sister in a sequel. So I think that's going to be kind of a similar format in this story, potentially with one of Hallie's childhood friends who also owns a gardening business. But I haven't read any kind of synopsis for this, so I'm looking forward to continuing Tessa Bailey. Unfortunately, I didn't give this as high a rating as I thought. I was like, am I getting into a reading slump? Like, am I cursing myself a little bit? I feel like I kind of am, because at the moment I'm currently reading 5 books and I'm like, what's wrong with me? However, one of those 5 books that I'm currently reading, I'm filming this a couple of days just before March ends so that I can edit it and upload it in time. But the book that I'm going to anticipate I'll finish in the next few days is one of the books that I am not questioning my will to read because it is so good. And it's Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. And this is a surprise, surprise, another dystopian apocalyptic story, except it's not a story about like, oh, a zombie outbreak. It's more of, you can see the gap between the rich and the working class, and it has really been stretched and divided to the point where people have to live in these kind of really dangerous communities with massive walls. And that's if you're lucky. A lot of people are completely impoverished and living on the street. And there's also this drug that got invented and that caused kind of the breakdown of civilization, which enables people to feel pleasure in like a almost sexual way when they watch fire. So there are all these people who are like crazed pyromaniacs that go around pillaging, stealing, murdering, and the communities that are left over behind that experience obviously a lot of death and violence, and they also really need to try and survive. So you've still got like police, you've still got water, you've still got stores and everything, but money is really scarce and resources are scarce, and everyone will come and just cut your throat to steal your supplies. So from that perspective, it's really tense. And I think the reason that I'm really enjoying this is because it's really clever. And the main character, she's like 19 at the moment, which is scary because it's set in 2024 onwards. And so I'm like, I can see now in present day, the gap between the working class and the rich being even more divided, especially after COVID. And so I'm like, oh, this could potentially happen to us. And this book was written in 1993. So I'm like, how is this so poignant? Anyway, the main character in it is so clever, even though she's young, but she's also had a long time to simmer on her ideas and think about it. And her father is a minister and a preacher, and he believes also in survival. So when she initially talks to him about her concerns, he doesn't dismiss her, which was actually really nice to see. But basically, this character starts to write her own verses and her own religion because she's surrounded by God in this little camp, but she doesn't believe, but she has her own beliefs that she starts to note down. So it's really about her journey internally as a character and also physically a bit later on. And she's starting to create this religion of sorts. And usually that wouldn't hook me about a story, but with this one, it's really well done and quite spectacular. I initially have it noted down here as 4 stars, but it's really growing on me really quickly, and I've not quite met the end yet, and I've got a couple of hours left. So I think it might end up being a 4.5 or 5 stars. I mean, my Goodreads is always linked below, so you can go and check what I think after I finish posting this video. But for the moment, I think it's gonna safely fall in that ballpark. I just don't know exactly what. So those are all of the things I have either read or put down. However, I said that I'm currently reading a lot of things. So aside from Parable of the Sower, I'm currently reading Men at Arms, but I'm not reading the physical copy. I was reading an ebook at the library. And funnily enough, I'm at the same percentage in this as an ebook that I am with another book that I'm currently reading. And that is The Light Between Us, I think it's called. It's a science fiction story that's sapphic, and it's about a woman who is trying to get a whole bunch of souls for satisfying the devil because she made a deal, I believe. That seems to what I can garner so far. And she collects their souls by making them become the next musical prodigy. So she trains violinists, I think. So I'm liking the tone. It's actually quite immersive, but when I have it on ebook, I just don't pay attention to it. Ebooks are really funny with me. I either just read them straight away and there's no breathing in between, or I kind of read them and then make a decision about them and then don't come back to them. With this one at my library, I'm just gonna let the hold lapse, and then I'll eventually in the future either get it physically or on an audiobook that I own. I'm at 8%. Similarly with this one, I'm also at 8%. So I have discovered that I can't read this as an ebook either. I don't know what's wrong with my brain, but that's why I'm still currently reading them, even though I haven't really touched them very much. So I might just put this on a TBR later in the year and cut my losses now, because this really needs to be read as a physical copy, and hopefully you end up seeing the other book in an actual book haul maybe coming up. We'll see what happens, but I'm probably going to DNF those, but it's not like a permanent DNF. And then as for another book that I'm currently reading, my last book that I'm reading is still Tress of the Emerald Sea, which is on my April TBR. So I'm hoping to get to this in either April or May, because I'm getting married at the end of April. So hopefully after all of that wedding planning stress, I'll be able to have more capacity to read and pay attention to longer stories that are a bit more slow paced. I'm enjoying the things I'm reading, I'm just not giving them the time of day to actually get through them. So I think that's why I'm going to put some stuff down and reprioritize some other stuff, and then also finish Parable of the Sower, which I'm really enjoying. That is all for my March wrap up. Let me know how many books you've read during the month. I would be really interested to know. I think I read about 6 in DNF. Thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat to you down below in the comments. I don't know, leave me some pink heart emojis in the comments if you got this far. But again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.